Welcome to Walking the Torah Portions. I'm Tyler Merwin, and this is Torah Portion VAYIGASH. This week's Torah portion is Genesis 44:18 through 47:27. The Haftarah this week is Ezekiel 37:15 through 28. VAYIGASH is translated, and he drew near. And the opening line says, Then Judah went up to him and said. Went up would be VAYIGASH. So we could say, Then Judah drew near to him and said. When we left off last week, it was a cliffhanger. Joseph's missing diviner's cup was found, aka planted, in Benjamin's sack. Joseph orders Benjamin to be kept in Egypt as a slave for the theft, but releases the other brothers to return in peace. Judah had stepped up in Canaan and pledged himself for Benjamin's safety. This week's Torah portion picks back up with Judah pleading his case to the Egyptian viceroy, which unbeknownst to Judah was Joseph. Judah recounts the story of going back to Canaan after the first trip and the reactions of Jacob, his father. Let's pick up Judah's plea in verse 30. Now therefore, as soon as I come to your servant my father, and the boy is not with us, then as his life is bound up in the boy's life, as soon as he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. And your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant our father with sorrow to Sheol. For your servant became a pledge of safety for the boy to my father, saying, If I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father all my life. Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy, as a servant to my Lord, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that would find my father. Joseph's test to see if the hearts of his brothers had changed, and the jealousy and bitterness they once had against him, have now come to the end. Joseph could see that his brothers had changed. They truly resented what they had done to Joseph some 22 years earlier. Judah was willing to give up his life for Joseph's little brother. And the anguish that they would feel at having to report the loss of Benjamin to their father, whom they deeply loved. Joseph, now fully convinced, opens up to his brothers as we begin chapter 45. Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who were stood by him. He cried, Make everyone go out from me. So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud, so the Egyptians heard it, and the house of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But the brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. I can only imagine the look on his brothers' faces at this point. While they were still stunned, he continues in verse 4. So Joseph said to his brothers, Come near to me, please. And they came near. And he said, I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on the earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. Or Joseph was tested and trained in Egypt for 13 years by God, before being elevated from the prison to the palace for such a time as this. Back when we were in school, we studied the lessons, then we took the test to see how well we learned the lesson. God, on the other hand, normally gives us the test first. Then our job is to discern the lesson. Joseph discerned that the events of his life at the hands of his brother were actually at the hands of the Holy One. I'm sure he struggled with finding the meaning in his circumstances, as we all do at certain times of our lives. But the pieces did come together, and after the transition to the palace, it really started to become clear. Can you remember a time in your life when your circumstances didn't make sense? Did you later see that what happened in the end was actually for your good or for the good of those around you? Joseph can now see clearly God's plan and his role in it, but his brothers are still stunned. The commentary says that just as God's master plan was revealed to his brothers when Joseph announced, "I am Joseph," that at the time to come, which would be the end of days, God would reveal himself and announce, "I am Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh." The veil will be lifted from our eyes, and we will comprehend everything that transpired throughout history. Amen. May it be so. After speaking with his brothers, we'll pick up in verse 16. When the report was heard in Pharaoh's house, Joseph's brothers have come, it pleased Pharaoh and his servants. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Say to your brothers, do this. Load your beasts and go back to the land of Canaan. Take your father and your households and come to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat of the fat of the land. And you, Joseph, are commanded to say, do this, take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father and come. Have no concern for your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours." So they loaded up their carts and donkeys and gifts from Egypt to gather Jacob and their families from the land of Canaan. When they arrive and tell their father that Joseph is alive and is ruling in Egypt, Jacob doesn't believe him. But after seeing all the carts and gifts that they brought with them, Jacob is convinced and his heart is revived. They loaded up all they had and headed back towards Egypt. On the trip back, they stop at Beersheba, and Jacob sacrifices to the Holy One, the same place that his father Isaac built an altar in chapter 26. And it says in 46, 2-4, "And God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, 'Jacob, Jacob.' And he said, 'Here I am.' Then he said, 'I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again. And Joseph's hand shall close your eyes.'" God speaks to Jacob in the night, reassuring him that this is part of the plan, and he will be made into a great nation while in exile. He also assures him that his beloved son Joseph was not only alive, but would be there for him at his own death. They set out again and arrive in Egypt. In verse 8-27, the Torah gives us account of all the Israelites coming into Egypt. This particular listing is arranged by their mothers, beginning with Leah, then Zilpah, then Rachel, and finally Bilhah. There's an odd miscount here with the children of Leah, though, in the list. In verse 15, after all her children and grandchildren are listed, they say they numbered 33. But if you count all the names in the list, you only come up with 32. So what's up with the math error? The sages believe that the person missing here is Jochebed, the future mother of Aaron, Miriam, and Moses. They say that she was conceived in Canaan, but wasn't born until they arrived in Egypt, and that's why she isn't named in the count. Altogether, there were 66 persons who came into Egypt from Canaan. When you add Joseph and his family, 4, Israel was 70 persons when they came into Egypt. Israel settles in Goshen, and we pick up in verse 29. Then Joseph prepared his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father in Goshen. He presented himself and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive." Joseph said to his brothers and his father's household, "I will go up and tell Pharaoh, and will say to him, my brothers and my father's household, who are in the land of Canaan, have come to me. And the men are shepherds, for they have been keepers of livestock. They have brought their flocks and their herds and all they have with them. When Pharaoh calls you and says, 'What is your occupation?' you shall say, 'Your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth, even until now, both we and our fathers, in order that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians." Goshen is in the delta region of the lower Egypt, which would be in the northern part of the Nile. In America, we usually equate lower with southern, as our major waterways usually run from north to south. But in Egypt, the Nile runs south to north, emptying into the Mediterranean Sea. Goshen was ideal land for pasturing animals, and one of only few areas in Egypt for such a purpose, as most of the land was desert. Joseph ends with the statement that every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. Egypt wasn't known for its pasture land, as the Nile was its primary source for sustenance. Egypt wasn't Texas. Many of the Egyptian gods were animals that they would not eat. Apparently, cows were also very high on this list. They did, however, pasture animals in Egypt, but primarily for their products, milk, wool, or even as work animals, rather than for food. It was assumed that foreign shepherds also ate the animals they kept, some of which were considered gods. This was seen as a type of idolatry or mixing to the Egyptians, and therefore looked down upon. In chapter 47, 5 of the brothers appeared before Pharaoh and relayed what Joseph had told them to say, and they were granted to settle in the land of Goshen as requested. We pick up in verse 7 as Joseph brings his father to see Pharaoh. Then Joseph brought Jacob, his father, and stood him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How many are the days of the years of your life?" And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, but they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning." And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. Jacob is 130 years old at this point and will live to be 147. In contrast, his father Isaac lived to be 180 years old, and his grandfather Abraham lived to be 175. Jacob states that few and evil have been the days of the years of my life. Evil in this instance is the Hebrew word ra, and can also be translated as unpleasant, painful, or distressful. These are probably better translations. Our journeys and footsteps are ordered by God, and they can be difficult and even painful, but they are never evil. Joseph then settles his family in the land of Goshen, which is also known by the land of Ramesses, and provides for their needs. Then we read in verse 13, "Now there was no food in all the land, for the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished by reason of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, in exchange for the grain that they had bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. And when the money was all spent in all the land of Egypt, in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? For our money is gone." And Joseph answered, "Give your livestock, and I will give you food in exchange for your livestock, if your money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the herds, and the donkeys. He supplied them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. So the money ran out in all the land of Egypt and Canaan, and Joseph exchanges their livestock instead of money for grain. The famine continues into the next year, and the people again appear before Joseph for food. Since they have nothing else left, they sell their land and themselves to Pharaoh in exchange for food. Joseph gives them grain and seed to plant. 1/5 of the harvest would be Pharaoh's, and 4/5 would be for the people. The text also states in verse 22, "Only the land of the priest he did not buy, for the priests had a fixed allowance from Pharaoh and lived on the allowance that Pharaoh gave them. Therefore, they did not sell their land." This speaks to the historical power balance over all the nations, between government, which would be Pharaoh in this instance, and the religious authority, which would be Egypt's priests. The priests were treated with deference, so they would continue to bless Pharaoh and honor him publicly before the people. This is in contrast to how God's system works. The priests of Israel, on the other hand, were not given an inheritance in the land, for they were servants of Adonai. The people were commanded to take care of the priesthood by allotting them land within their own territories. In God's economy, He has the power, not the priesthood. The Torah portion ends in verse 27 that says, "Thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they gained possessions in it. And they were fruitful and multiplied greatly." Our walk in service to God may be difficult at times, but our job is to be fruitful and prosperous where He has planted us. As these days seem to grow darker, look up, for your redemption draws nigh. I pray this teaching has been edifying to you. Let's lift up the name of the Holy One with love in Echad. Shalom.